So let's have a look at the questions that we've got for this block. And there may be a couple that I missed because I've got back to the office and had to do a report urgently. And so there may have come a couple in late. No. Okay, great. We have everything covered then. Hopefully.
I did send some questions in, but I marked it December 10th, so
I
I don't know if he sent them through to you or not.
I haven't got anything through from you, so
I can read it out to you later.
Forward them on to Peter now, and he'll forward them to me, and I'll find them. So the question is, can tree roots displace or distort pipes? And the answer is yes. Don't go take the comment that they can't. Particularly light grade plastic pipe, which is the stuff that's normally used, roots can crush that. It's fairly easy to crush a plastic pipe. It takes a little bit more effort to crack or press or deform something that's not a thicker wall. So Kyle Hill's just sent his apology, Peter, in case you're wondering what that was. And I'll turn mine to silent. That's done. So yes, those lighter wall plastic pipes, the standard stormwater, standard sewer line, is easy to distort. Once you get to pressure pipe, the answer is no, it's not distortable. And that's part of the reason why it's pressure pipe, is it's made an appropriately thick wall, and then that allows that to do its job. Sorry. So that's that question answered, hopefully, and deal with that. So anytime you're dealing with a situation where you think maybe there's a problem with the root system and the tree coming into a conflict, you can go ahead and allow on every visit. Okay. I was just having some problems with Google. So yes, you can get suitably thick enough wall pipes to deal with that without any problems, and that makes good sense. The difference between, say, a heavy wall pipe and a light wall pipe might only be $1 a meter. So on the total project, it's not a huge amount. It might be a couple of dollars a meter. Without question, the most expensive part of getting plumbing put in is what?
The labour.
Plumbing, the plumber. The pipe's the cheap bit. It's his labour. And so if you're going to pay for a plumber, it makes sense, to use appropriately thick-walled pipe when trees are concerned. And the courts in New South Wales, at least, have ruled on one occasion that stuff should be fit for purpose. So that's going to be one of those situations.
Your mic's muted, Mark.
Yep, thank you. That was me making a stupid mistake. I'm pretty good at doing them. So,
Well,
so next question that has been raised that I have is interested in talking about tree management plans in relation to arboricultural impact assessments. What information should be included? How and where should be presented? Is a drawing or a plan as well as written specifications? So there's a whole pile of questions there from David. David, are you online? Yes.
Yeah, I am. Hi, Mark. G'day.
Yep. Great. So, an arboricultural impact assessment report, or the standard, talks about it, and then it's been made clearer in the new standard. So there's a new draft of the standard. It is coming out fairly soon for final editing and commenting off, and then it'll come out to industry as a final standard. There was a bit of argy-barging going backwards and forwards. I'm not sure that everything is always perfect, but it's certainly a marked improvement on where we were. So we do have the new standard coming out, and that new standard will help improve that situation. And so there's several stages to an arboricultural impact assessment report. First stage is your inspection of the site. You're going to gather data, all sorts of information. Then you're going to provide some information to the design team, and that's in the form of a preliminary arboriculture report. And so you're going to say, this is all the information about the trees, and here are the things you should think about. Here are the most important trees. Here are the least important trees, whatever it might be that you want to convey to them. Oftentimes that step is bypassed by the developer. He comes to you and says, we're going to build this, now what? And the answer is you still need to collect all that data, but you lose some of the significance of saying, hey, this tree is important, redesign, or, you know, this tree is unimportant, redesign. And so the time to do that is at that stage when you first engage, is to get back on the phone or by email or whatever and say, hey, have you thought about making things a little bit better here? Have you thought about how you're going to deal with things? So the design team's gone away, they've given some thoughts to those suggestions that you've come up with, and they've come back with the final plans, or you've been presented the final plans, either way. The next thing you're going to do is produce an arboricultural impact assessment report. And that assessment report, it's interesting, it varies in Victoria and Western Australia. In Western Australia and Victoria, your consent authority or your relevant authority will give an approval and then ask you to prepare the details about protection. And that seems to be asked about. The reason it's asked about is they're making the decision, yes, you can do that, and not you. And you should be making that decision in my mind. So in my mind, every arboricultural impact assessment report should have, how are we going to protect these trees? How are we going to manage these trees during the development process? And that's done in two documents. One is, and they've got new names under the new draft, but one is a tree protection plan, which is a drawing or tree protection drawing. And the other thing is a set of specifications. Those two things are going to tell the relevant authority how this project will be successful. In Victoria and Western Australia, you rely on the consent authority saying, yeah, I think this will work. Now we'll get David to write a set of specifications. And that's just, in my mind, plain dumb, because in my experience, and you can quote me on it, we're a rapidly growing industry, got a critical shortage of consultants, and some of those people make it into local government. And so you're relying on the person at local government having as much knowledge about trees as you. They may do and they may not. So you need to communicate with them. And it's been a part of one of my reports. You can get online and find them there. They're out there, arboricultural impact assessment reports, is to give education. Because I'm dealing often with not just builders that know nothing, but I hate to say consulting arborists that don't know a lot about trees either. And they're working in local government or working for local government. And so you'll get silly things said. And I can think of one that I'm dealing with at the moment, where the view of the council is, you haven't provided us with the retention value of the trees. Well, local government, if you read the standard, that's not for you, that's for the design team. You're not the design team. You can make whatever decisions you want as a local government person. So we get these mix-ups and real screw-ups. I've got one at the moment where the two incursions on the tree are less than two different trees are less than 10%, and the council says, well, you've got to do a root investigation. I'm thinking, not based on the current standard, and clearly not based on the revised standard. The reason the revised standard is being revised is because, can you believe it, arborists have trouble reading. Myself, all of us. You get an email, you read the first 4 words, and the rest you miss. And there's some really critical things there. And so in 3.3.2, in the current standard, talks about a minor encroachment, and it says minor encroachment should not require a root investigation. Now, it doesn't say they must not include, it says should not include. And generally, it's going to be the case. And then for a major encroachment, you may need to consider root investigation and a whole pot of other things. So root investigation is just one of those things. And when you think about that, how does someone then say, well, you can't do that? That's got an 8% incursion, that's not acceptable. Essentially, the standard says that at 8% incursion or 9% or 10%, you almost don't need an arborist. What you need to do is make space for the tree contiguous and offset from the proposed works. So there's definitely a need in my mind, David, doesn't matter where you are, to communicate. That's the purpose of writing a report, communicate. So who are we communicating when we write an arboricultural impact assessment report? Communicating to the people that are going to make decisions about what we believe about the trees, about what we believe about the work and the impact it's going to have, and what we believe is the way to care for that tree or those trees during that development process. So I think that's important. And another thing that we're doing is communicating to the property owner or the developer. So we're trying to get everyone to understand the basics, what we're on about. And I'm amazed at how hard we make reports, make it to read reports. Again, we as arborists, we hit that email, we get the first sentence maybe, and then we're off. The same is true for everyone else. The great big long documents, they don't want them. And I'm guilty as anyone of writing great big long documents. So it's trying to figure out how to get it concise without missing the critical parts. So a drawing, David, at the lodgement stage, in my mind, you might have to amend that drawing, but it's easy enough to amend a drawing unless it's a complete redraw. So this is where I think the fences should go. This is where I think there should be some ground protection in. I call ground protection load sharing surface because that's essentially what it is. It's a surface that allows for distribution of the load over a bigger area, but that's ground protection. Where do I want trunk protection? Do I want it? How do I want it to be? Those are all the things that you want to communicate. And I think it's important to communicating to a lot of people why you're doing that. So why are you putting in a rigid temporary fence? You know, why do you want some ground protection? And I think if you communicate that, that will help the process work better. Okay, and so that's what creates. Now, my memory is as useless as anything nowadays, but in the new standard, you'll see that they're called two different things. I'm pretty sure one's called a tree protection specification and one's called a tree protection plan. Okay, and those two documents, the plan can be in the specification can be on the plan. It's all up to you. There's no black and white in that.
Excuse me, Mark, do you envisage that being incorporated into the arboriculture impact assessment report or as a standalone?
The specifications and the plan need to be standalone, but because they're going to be on the development site, they're going to be included as a part of the site documentation. In fact, the standard says that the tree protection plan, which, if we go back to the old days, includes both documents. Okay, the current standard, both documents need to be on site. And oftentimes that's all they need is, where's the tree protection zone? Where's the washout zone? You know, where am I putting the fences? Where am I putting ground protection? All of that. What trees am I keeping? What trees am I removing? That all needs to be on site. And then any documentation needs to be on site.
I'm just thinking that how this is going to work going forward, and it's been a long, hard process getting various stakeholders to get to the point where an arboriculture impact assessment report is now well known and fairly well understood and required, and you go to a lot of trouble to get that document up and running and, you know, part of the mix.
And that's not going to change. So
But
you will
now
we're
going to need another additional document. Is that
no, it can be. I've always included those as the final section of my impact assessment, and then as my first appendix or second appendix. So you can have them done however you like. But in my view, the arboricultural impact assessment report needs to include or be accompanied by those 2 extra items, which could be as one, or it could be included in the document, and should be. I mean, that's what the current standard says, that you should say how you're going to protect the trees and draw how you're going to protect the trees. Those 2 requirements are already requirements in the standard. And so that's what we should be communicating, I think, to the client. And again, this the primary purpose is to communicate. If you're in Victoria, if you're in Western Australia, you can say, oh, look, I don't think this is going to have a lot of impact. I think it's going to have a fair bit of impact on this tree. We've done some root investigation, and based on that root investigation, I believe that, you know, this is going to be the case and that's going to be the case, and have no drawing and no plan. And what will happen then is the relevant authority will then require you to prepare it. Every now and again that happens in New South Wales. It annoys the hell out of me, because the first thing I want to say is adjust the path. Oh, can't. We've already approved the path. Change the level. Oh, we can't change the levels. You already approved the levels. Well, you want me to write a report based on what you've already approved, then why even bother getting me to do it? Just give me some conditions of consent. So it's a difficult one. I don't think there's a magical answer, because the way that the cultures of the 2 areas have worked differently. And as I said, we've every now and again we get in Sydney, a report will be approved without a plan or a drawing. That's fine, but it's very hard to change things. Whereas if I say, David, you're the consent authority now, here's my report, here's how I think we're going to do it in details, this is the issues we're going to have, here's how I want to manage it. You can always come back to me and say, Mark, not really happy with this. I think you need to discuss X, Y, Z, or A, B, C. Or you could put that as a condition in your things. You could say, subject to the tree protection plan and tree protection drawing prepared by Arborist Network. In addition, irrigation should be applied once a week for the summer months or whatever it might be. Does it make sense?
Yes. Yep.
So, David, any other questions about that? Any further information sought on that?
No, that gives me an insight into where I should be looking.
Yeah, and again, what I tell you to do, and I tell everyone to do, is go find reports that you like. Arboricultural impact assessment reports. Ask yourself what you like about it and what you don't like about it. The stuff you don't like about it, pull that out, okay, and look at the formatting that they've got. So for me, I hate a report that's got some discussion about bits and pieces. I hated having a whole bunch of stuff that I really don't want to have there. So a site photograph with an aerial plan up front saying this is where the lot is. I'm pretty sure every owner knows where his lot is. I'm pretty sure every consent authority knows where the lot is. That's just a plan detail they have. So I won't put that in. Adam Tom, I don't know whether it's online, Adam will say, I always give them a site plan because I like to make sure that we're talking about the same site. So again, each of you have your preferences. Okay, it's who you are. But take those things, and it's the format or the layout or the concept of it that is worth looking at. To me, to have all that tree data anywhere but in an appendix is a pain. No one can read data. So in my view, all the information about, height, spread, all that sort of stuff, chuck it at the back. Don't put it in the front of the report. Put it up front at the back. So it's usually Appendix 1. This is the data about the tree. And Appendix 2 for me is the tree protection plan.
I think there's arguments both for and against that, Mark. My view is that if you've got a number of trees, say, roughly more than a dozen, more than 20, that data then forms this big ungainly lump. And it doesn't matter where you put it, it's still a big ungainly lump. And if you're reading the report and having to think about, well, what's that tree 15? What was it again? And you've got to go, so you either have to go to the body of the report or...
Great point, Peter. So if you're communicating and you're talking about some individual trees in the body of your report in your discussion, and you're saying tree 15, perfect spot to put a common name, or perfect spot to even use a scientific name. Yeah,
definitely. But it might be, there's lots of reasons that you might have to cross-reference that.
Yeah, look, and hopefully you don't need to cross-reference that. Hopefully the discussion and the way you do it tries to minimize the amount that you need to go backwards and forwards. At some stage or other, you're going to need to go to a plan as well. Because when I say trees 7, 9, and 15, you need to know where they are. So ultimately, particularly when you're dealing with another arborist, there's going to be more tendency to go backwards and forwards. The builder will hopefully look at your plan and you'll see the trees that are being retained, the trees that are being removed, the trees that are of low value, the trees that are of high value, where the fence is going to be. He's going to see all of that, and he's probably not going to read a lot of the body of the report. And that's just the nature of who he is. That's why he wants a plan, a physical drawing. And the number of times that I've had a builder or a developer, even a large size organization, say to me, yeah, but what does all that crap mean? And give me a pile of specifications. And I have to go through and sort it out for them. And sometimes, let me tell you, that's really difficult, trying to set it out in logical stages. So one of the things I will say is whatever you do for your specifications, do it based on the logical stages you're going to get to in the development. So what are you going to have to do at the design stage? What are you going to have to do at the site establishment stages, demolition, construction, landscaping, finishing off, whatever stages you want, that's up to you. But find reports and look at the flow and the template concepts that they've got and say, does that work for me? And again, you don't all want to be Mark Hartley. Otherwise, you're all going to have bullseyes in the back of your heads and people shooting out your windows, okay? You don't want that. You want to be you, and you want to be relating to your client as the person that you are, if that makes any sense.
So going off your what you were saying about the new standards and that, Mark, and probably going back to a bit what Peter was saying, like I try and set mine out exactly like what you said, you know what I mean? Everything that's relevant to a certain part of a project is a different appendix or a plan with where the trees are and whatnot.
Yeah, look, again, it's individual choice. My view is data in the middle of a readable component of a report is very difficult because it's a big block.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Two trees or 3 trees, fine. I'll still you have a data sheet because you don't want to have all the data up there. You really only thing you want is what's the tree number and what is it?
Yeah. No,
Sometimes
100%.
rather than that might be a useful table to have summarized. But if I look at the average arboricultural impact assessment report, there'll be at least one line of information about every tree and sometimes that can be 2 lines on an A3 page going along, soil height, canopy spread, north, south, east, west, trunk diameter, north, south, trunk diameter, east, west, soil, retention value, landscape significance, stars, shriv, you just see this ecological significance, you see this great big long list of information that people want to give you, native, exotic, all that's useful stuff.
Yeah.
But when you're reading the report, you're not going to read most of the information.
Well, I'd keep it simple.
Is superfluous. That just keep it there, but it then goes towards the back because I want to read discussion, then I want to read your conclusions or your recommendations, whichever way you want to do it in terms of it. A lot of the councils up here want an executive summary, which is effectively your conclusion. I know Tom's spoken on this before, and Adam says, no, if you don't want to read the report, don't read it. If you want to read the report, read it.
That's what I was going to say about what's good about the executive summary, Mark, is that you put that in and nobody has to do anything except read the executive summary. They just never open the rest of your report.
Look, and that executive summary, if you're working as a consulting arborist for a developer, is going to read much the same. It's going to say, this is what's been proposed. This is the impact it's going to have on the trees. I've given you some information on how to manage that impact, and if that impact is correctly managed, then the deal's done and sealed. And in that information package that you're going to give them, the specifications, I have a design stage in my specifications. It was my arboricultural impact assessment report will on occasions require them to do things like reconsider the design of the footpath, alter the level. So it's there. Because the consent authority is at liberty for us, and I believe in Victoria and Western Australia, to say subject to the plans are approved, and then you've got to give then construction plans at the next stage. So again, I won't put that in the executive summary. I don't want to go through all that stuff up there. I want you to at least read some of the report. So it's very basic. I just communicate that I know what the development's about. They're going to knock down the existing 2 houses. They're going to build 12 units along with driveway, basement parking, and landscaping. So at least they know that I've read the plans and I haven't just had some guesses. Then I'm going to say, the proposed development requires the removal of 22 out of 33 trees. The 11 trees that are proposed for retention can be suitably retained and remain healthy and stable, provided that the tree protection plan drawing and tree protection plan specifications, they will be whatever they are in the new standards. So they'll again be listed down, are followed. And as a result, a site-specific set of specifications and drawing have been prepared and are included in this report. And that's my standard executive summary, something in that sort of ilk.
So saying that
how or why it's going to be successful, they've got to read the report. So what was that, Peter?
Hang on a sec. Darren's just trying to make a comment. Darren?
So you could basically keep your impact assessment the same as what you've said previously and just change a couple of headings, yeah?
Yeah. All that when the new data comes out, all that you'll do is tweak to match the new language. And there is a reasonable change in the new language. And there are changes I'm not at liberty to give you all that information at this stage, but there are some changes. Some of the changes that were originally recommended, industry said, "Oh, hang on a second here, we can't have that much change. That's too much change in one go." And the other thing that's I think is great news is the standard has already been approved. The new standard has already been, or the new version of the standard has already been approved for a revision. We understood that there were things that we wanted to do that we couldn't do in the time frame. So we'd like to give you a better flow chart, better visuals, better illustrations and drawings, so that we communicate more clearly. It's just amazing that every now and again, at least probably once a fortnight, I read something that someone writes based on the Australian standard and think, you clearly haven't read it. And then I sent an email off to David Evans from Ballard the other day, and David sent back and made the comment, you clearly haven't read it to me. We all do it. And because we all do it, we want to try and reduce that ability to have any confusion. We want improved clarity in information. So I think there are some definite improvements. Another thing that I think is a definite improvement is there's a provision under the new standard, or the new draft of the standard, to have semi-permanent or semi-permanent fencing. So not just panels, but you can actually have posts in the ground. And I think that's a nice improvement. One of the biggest things I find on development sites is you start off with 6 panels and you quickly end down at 3. Almost doesn't matter what you do. Posts in the ground are a little bit more permanent.
Mark, this is slightly off this topic, but not. Where are we up to with the revision of the pruning standard 4373?
And look, it's been discussed, and I believe there are some people looking at it, but I don't know where it's at. I can tell you that the next standard that EVO 18 is going to be looking at is a standard for tree risk assessment. And that might sound horribly scary, but it's not. As we believe it, we won't be looking at a method and saying this method must be employed, rather that there are things that you should and shouldn't be doing when you are doing a tree risk assessment. And I've been working recently on a presentation that looks at problems with tree risk assessment, and I think I'm up to about 17 common areas that I see. I get to review about 5 every week, and I'm amazed at how common problems are. I started this morning at a school. It's got Lophostomen convertus. The Lophostomen convertus was almost dead when it was inspected last year. And the risk assessor said, high risk, urgent removal. Now, it's interesting that the largest branch that's broken off so far is 1 centimetre in diameter. I am not sure that I could put that into high risk and urgent. It's in 1 year. That's where they've equated it. They've looked at what's the worst case scenario.
A high risk still doesn't mean that it's going to fail. It just means that that's the likelihood of the consequences.
The likelihood a tree with 1,000 1 centimetre branches has only lost a couple of 1 centimetre branches says that the likelihood has probably been overestimated, and the consequences have probably been overestimated. The assumption is it's a dead tree, then therefore the whole tree is going to fall over and kill somebody.
I think people forget that trees are made of wood. That's the same stuff we make houses out of. And
the same stuff we make fence posts and telegraph. Sorry, if you're in South Australia, stovey poles. I don't mean to be rude, but yeah, in the East Coast, from certainly all the way through New South Wales and up, except in high bushfire areas now where they're starting to use concrete poles, which is making some sense. We use wooden poles that go into the ground, and some of those wooden poles are old and weren't treated with the same methods that they use now. And some of those poles have been sitting in the ground for 40, 50 years. So I'm not suggesting that you leave dead trees for 40 or 50 years. And I think there's a really good reason to remove trees within a few years of them dying, 2 to 10 years, depending on what the tree is. And that is, it gets harder for the arborist to remove the tree the longer it's been dead. And the risk from associated with trees, risk of mortality is about 1 in 5 million. The background risk is pretty close to 1 in 5 million. That is, nearly all our deaths are unpreventable. When you look at the tree, you say, oh yeah, but I could tell why that failed. The question is, if you'd looked at the tree beforehand, would you have necessarily done anything? And then if you had done anything to, or that same thing to every tree that was similar in similar location in Australia, how many millions and tens of millions of dollars would you have spent? You weigh all that up. So our background level of risk is somewhere close to 1 in 5 million. Do we really need to do anything most of the time? I mean, when you think about 1 in 5 million, it takes a lot to get up to the 1,500 people that have been killed each year on the roads. Now, I'm not saying that road death of 1 in 10,000 is acceptable, but it's odd. Here we are in Australia where it's legal to drink, get up to 0.5 and drive. As long as you don't go over 0.5, or if you stop just under 0.5, you're fine. At 0.8, the likelihood of you having a serious and fatal accident was double. That's why we took it away from 0.8 down to 0.5. At 0.5, you're still increasing the likelihood of you having a fatal accident. But we say in Australia, well, that's okay. To be able to have a social drink is far more important than human lives. But a little bit of speeding, that's bad. Now, I'm not suggesting you go and speed, but it's interesting how we have these disparities in the way we think about risk in society. And that's the difficulty we deal with. I mean, we deal with talking about risk as arborists, and again, I would say that 9 out of 10 risk assessment reports that I read, I look at and I want to throw them in the bin. I think you don't even understand risk. When someone writes there's a safety hazard risk, and I've read it, what is a safety hazard risk? I've got no idea. When someone says the risk of the tree falling over is, they don't mean risk, they mean likelihood. We can't even get our language right. And I know you're going to think that lawyers understand it and the barristers understand it, but they don't. And the judges don't. It's a rare thing to get a barrister or a judge that understands risk and has their head around it, understands the numeracy that goes with it. So very difficult. Next question, Peter.
Good question, Mark. I sent some stuff out to our list of ArborMentors. I think one of them today.
I'm not sure I got anything else. Oh, yes, I did. Sorry, Peter.
That's okay.
Not that one. No.
What about one from Nils?
I haven't
Did you see
seen
that
anything
one?
from Nils. I
So,
haven't seen anything else from you.
can you, as a project arborist, have a trusted but not qualified person replace you during a site visit in case of injury or sickness? The person might, for example, have to cut and measure a few roots, take some pictures, or supervise excavations. I appreciate your input.
I think the answer is yeah. It makes great sense to have a trusted person that can fill in, and I'm one of those people that are lucky enough that there are a number of good arborists in my area that I'm happy to piggyback with. That is, I'm happy to pass stuff on to them, and they'll pass stuff on to me to help each other out. I think that's a perfectly appropriate process.
Which is exactly what I commonly do. If I, need to be in two places at once, I'll ask a qualified colleague, and there's enough of them around here. I think Kath's helped me out on more than one occasion, for example, so that you don't have to find somebody that's unqualified.
Yeah, but again, I don't have anything with unqualified. I think, again, we get this issue, and it certainly applies with the way I read specifications and the way that the standard in some ways was specified. I think reads like, how can we get arborists more work? How can we get the consulting arborists more work? So, for example, when the report says the project arborist must be present during the excavation of the entire 180-metre long trench. Well, does he need to be present during the entire 180 metres of the trench? Or does the excavator need to know how to deal with roots when he comes across them? One of the best excavation processes ever was simply communicating to the builder what I wanted to see to give the evidence that I needed to give. And he hand dug a trench 1.8 metres high, 1 metre wide, right past an Norfolk Island pine. It was an amazing piece of work. And yeah, he cut through some 1 centimetre and 1.5 centimetre diameter roots, but essentially that's all he cut through. And, you know, it was brilliant. Now, he didn't need me to be there to supervise that. It would have probably been a 4 or 5 day job. And, you know, maybe I might need to be there at the beginning just to make clear what we're talking about. And perhaps if there's a question, you can give me a call. I mean, nowadays phones are great. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it always needs to be a qualified and experienced person. And for some things, I ask my clients to do it. So I can think of a situation last year where I went out to a site and the tree company had come in and they chipped into one of the tree protection enclosures. And the mulch was up probably about 1 metre up the base of a liquid amber. It's a little deeper than I would like. So I said to the builder, can you just sit on the outside of that with an excavator, get somebody beside you to watch it and drag that out of that area and drag it down. If you can get it down to 20 centimetres, I'm fine with that. And when you've done that, send me a photograph. So he did. This was submitted. I was out the site again a month later, but I didn't need to go back a second time to take a photograph. I was in a position where a photograph would tell me the story. And so I don't think you always need to have a qualified person overseeing it, every little component of it. What I want is evidence that it's been done.
Further question from Nils. Have you got any tips for sitting the ISA certified arborist exam?
Go to sleep. If you've got a Cert 3 from a reasonable RTO, read through the materials for the ISA certification exam and you'll pass it really easy. I think that ISA is a really good basic document, and generally the quality of Australian education, well, I'm going to get in trouble, but it whoops ass on American education. They don't have a certificate 3 in arboriculture. Essentially, their certification is you go study these units, you go study these modules, and you'll be a qualified. So this is their certification, their credential. Every arborist I've known who's got a diploma says it was just a walk in the park. Having said that, I have performance anxiety every time I do any form of study. So I'd be horrified. I did mine in America in the earlier days and had to do identification of Californian trees. I spent 2 days driving around learning Californian trees and I passed. Okay, I think I got 86%. So not great, but not horrendous, given that at that stage I had no certificate and no qualifications in arboriculture. I was just an arborist because I woke up one morning, did a 6-day course, and that was all you needed to do. So don't panic about it. It's a nice pleasurable process. There's a couple of BCMAs in Australia as well. I don't know whether there's in Australia. I don't know whether there's a person who's done their BCA board certified arborist in Australia, and I question it because, you know, why would you? And that was one of my comments back to Sharon Lilly when she asked me about it. I've got a diploma. Why do I want to go through all the anxiety of having to do a whole lot of extra study and then meet the ongoing performance requirements? So when you become an ISA certified arborist, you need to do, and I'm going to go from memory, 24 CEUs every 3 years. 8 CEUs is a nothingness. You'll do that routinely in a year.
Did
But again,
Niels, did
you're out. You go ahead, Darren.
Did they send you out like an information pack with a booklet that you can read over at all?
Well, the stuff on
It's only been online material for me.
Yeah,
I'm sure you can.
So,
I'm sure
look,
there is a book you can order, I think.
yes,
yeah,
there is
look,
a study guide. ISA Certified Arborist Study Guide is available from ISA, and it's a relatively good document that covers it. If you wanted something that was pretty good, you need to know a bit about your local plant material identification, and then Harris, Matheny, and Clark on each of the topics. Even Harris second edition will get you through it.
Yeah. So the book that they send you out, the first one, when I done it the first time, it was pretty around about type what questions they'd ask you, but the second one, only half of it was relevant, eh? So just be aware. Yeah. But it's a bit common knowledge, so you'll be right.
Yeah.
It is.
It's a nice, fun thing to do. The biggest pain is remembering you've got to get your CEUs in. So you go off to somewhere and you'll, a week later, you think, oh, damn it, I forgot to put them in. Essentially, if you go to a conference once a year, you've got it covered. If you go to a workshop once a year, you've got it covered, anything like that. Once you're BCMA, then you require a lot more. You've got to do every 3 years, you've got to do 20 in science and different disciplines in order to remain a board certified master arborist. And that's equivalent to our consulting arborist. In terms of knowledge, I think most consulting arborists that have gone through a good college and spent a reasonable amount of time, like Peter, would be able to go out and get a BCMA with a little bit of study and not too much anxiety. And that the bit of study is just to cover those little bits that America values more highly than we do necessarily. Next question.
So it's going off that. So what you're talking about there, they require units for you to keep your accreditation with actually what you were just saying. Sorry, I might have.
Yeah, so when I'm an ISA certified arborist,
Okay.
need to do 24 CEUs, continuing education units. And I've got to sit my bum on a seat in a learning environment for 24 hours every 3 years.
Right.
And that's been the Vermeer rigging workshop. Get CEUs for that. It's the ISA and the Arbor Australia conference. It's the workshop I did a couple of years ago on protection of trees and development sites. It's QTRA training or valid training. They all count as CEUs.
Yeah.
Board certified master arborist CEUs are more specific. That's the only difference.
Okay.
You must complete certain amounts of CEUs in each domain. The one I know well is science. You must do at least 20 hours of science. And science units are hard to get, which is one of the reasons why the anatomy workshop is popular in the US. Is it's an easy way to get 21 CEUs in science.
Okay.
I think that's good that you need to get CEUs every year or every 3 years, because we've got nothing like that here, do we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. It's the system is a bit of a mess at the moment. I've been involved with Arboriculture Australia trying to streamline it, trying to make it work better, and there's still some problems remaining. So it's a work in progress, but Actually, just for your information, Arboriculture Australia recognises attendance or even watching these sessions will count for 1 CEU per session. So just you can get enough CEUs for your Australian qualifications just by attending these sessions.
So going off that, Peter, like what you just said, like watching these, I've got on to it's Arboricultural Association, but I think it's in England or something like that. They do like a webinar every Thursday, so it's basically I think 5 a.m. like Sydney time here, and it's just different random topics about different trees all around the world. It's quite interesting. When I get back, I'll send you a link to it, and maybe you can broadcast it to everyone.
Yeah, there's a variety of activities that will gain you CEUs. So the ISA recognise certain activities and not others.
Yeah, right. Okay.
For your ISA, you need to get their CEUs, and as Mark said, if you attend a conference, you'll get them. If you attend workshops, you'll get them. What we have done, one of the reasons that we changed the system in Australia was that it was so onerous. So a few years ago, when you went to a conference, for example, you'd have to line up and get your name signed off to get your CEU for that particular presentation.
Yep.
And that caused problems. And then the other schemes where they flashed a code up on the screen at the end of there's been a number of different ways of. So what we're trying to do now, what we're trialling now, what we're accepting now is that we have a form. Arboriculture Australia has a form. So you fill the form out, you detail the activities that you think should be sufficient to gain you the CEUs, and then the ARBOS staff go, yep, that's fine. And it could be you attended one of those webinars from the UK. It could be that, so instead of trying to specify it has to be this, or this, and we've tried to make it so that you still continue with your education, but we're not making it so hard that it's almost an impossible bar to jump. And
yeah.
One of the reasons that we've come to here is that
You're all soft. Sorry. Yeah.
in the old days, the way it was set up was that really, unless you went to the conference, it was very, very difficult for you to get.
I think that's true. One of the wonderful things that came out of COVID is we're getting more comfortable with alternate education in every way. And it does make it difficult if you can't get to a conference. It means you've got to start looking for more things when you're talking about doing 20. I think ours was 20 or 24 CEUs each year, wasn't it, Peter?
18, I think.
Yeah. So the bottom line is, the other side is, we don't want to just be
We don't want to dumb it down, and that's the big juggling act that's going on at the moment, is to just try and find that sweet spot, and so that we ensure that. One of the things that I noticed about the way it was run previously, ARBOS was run previously, was that there was a lot of effort was put into scraping out, catching those 1 or 2 people that were doing the wrong thing. So they would come to the conference. You'd think if you spent however many thousands of dollars it costs to go to the conference, and the sessions are on, you had to sign off on each set, because somebody might say, oh, look, I bought the ticket, but I didn't actually go to the session. So we have to do something about that. So I just think that there aren't so many dishonest arborists, that we need to make it really difficult for everyone just to screen out those 1 or 2 people that might like to do the wrong thing.
I think you've got to balance it up though, Peter, and
Yes.
I will pick at the other side, and that is, if you want to know what it's like, be the first speaker on the Tuesday and see how many people have found the drug and alcohol abuse seminar the night before to be too much.
That's right. And it is a balance. It is trying to find that sweet spot.
It is.
But I don't think
the bottom line is, regardless, and when I said you're soft, I meant that from the point of view of, it should be really easy for us as arborists. I've got a few years up on most of you. Certainly as a consultant, I've got a few years up on most of you. And I just cannot help but get way more CEUs than I need each year because I want to be learning more. I feel constantly, I'm driving along at the moment listening to lectures by Greg Moore because I'm thinking, how well have I got that in my head? And I'm amazed. You can tell Greg this, the guys down in Melbourne. I'm amazed at how dumb I am and how many things I missed during the lectures and how many things that I haven't got as clear a knowledge on that I should have. And that's always going to be the case. And we just talk about one little discipline in arboriculture. You think about the number of issues that we're dealing with. Plan reading, we deal with that. Planning codes, legislation, entomology, mycology, tree anatomy and physiology, taxonomy, the identification of trees. They're just a few that come to my mind at the top of my head. And,
I agree, Mark, but the rub isn't that you should, or it's difficult, or there's a problem with people doing that. It's how do you prove it? And if you make the system so onerous to provide proof.
And we'd agree with that. So you shouldn't have to do that. And one of the things that the ISA did that was good is it's every 3 years. So you have a couple of bad years, you can go catch up and catch up relatively quickly. The problem if you go back, and Peter's right, if you go back 5 years ago, outside of the conference, there might have been only 2 conferences or other things that went on that you could have got points for. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there thinking, well,
you could get a CEU if you published a book review.
Yeah.
You could get a CEU if you presented a paper.
Yeah.
That was about it.
And that's right. So there's the difficult side of it. So it became a thing. Having said that, as arborists, we should be reading books. As arborists, we should be trying
to read them, but to publish a book review, that's another step.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not arguing.
That's another step. And I just think that in those days, there was so much attention given to trying to squash down and weed out those 1 or 2 people that might have been doing the wrong thing, that it just made the system so difficult for everyone. And we still have the overflow, the ongoing from those systems, and it's still not right.
Yeah, no, and it's always difficult. And I every year when I was education chair, I remember seeing the letter come in or the email come in from the one guy. I'm not going to mention any names, except now they're a guy, so it wasn't Vicky. Unless she identifies as a guy, in which case then it was you. But who would say, but I got my qualifications in 1979. I don't see why I should have to do any more study. And I just look at the changes in arboriculture in that time and think, oh boy, if you don't see why you need to do ongoing study, then that's scary as. And, again, one of those things I went to I'm happy to praise the guy. I read a lot of risk reports. A lot of them are bad. The other day I read one from a guy called Hugh Millington, and I thought, oh, what a wonderful, pleasant change that I'm reading a risk report that I can look at and say, yes, here's somebody who understands risk. Now, he made some comment about a tight angle on a Lophostomus convertus, and, his view was that it should go. And I'm thinking, yeah, because he doesn't have the benefit of Brian Kane's paper from 2023. And, one paper can make a whole difference to how you view arboriculture. And that's, a really important thing. We need to do that. And so, yeah, I think that having something is important. And I think that it should be easy enough that the average consulting arborist in the back of Willamacanka, like Neil's, where, he's away from everything geographically, shouldn't be prohibitive for him. But as Darren points out, there's just so many freebies going on nowadays. There's so many online ones that realistically, getting education now is a lot easier than it used to be, and we as arborists should be looking for those opportunities. And it's not just in here. You know, I enrolled in a course in report writing through one of the universities a few years ago because it was online. There's actually an online component to urban forestry degree available. I've never been able to get the enrollment finished out of Italy, but you know, they are there, and the aim is to try and improve education generally in our profession. And I think that's why everyone's here.
Hang on a sec, Mark. Rob, you have something to say?
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the papers we should all read is the difference between the recovery of tree roots after they're carefully pruned according to the standard, or whether they're just dragged away with an excavator.
That paper sounds a bit familiar, Rob.
I thought it would.
Yeah, look, there's lots of things, and again, we're still in our infancy as a profession, and the other thing is we've got to be careful when we read scientific literature to understand things, and sometimes it looks like it's saying one thing. So Benson is a very clever arborist who's doing lots of great work on roots, and he's demonstrated that, you know, if we want to have no impact on a tree, we should probably be 15 times away from it, based on conditions in a lower rainfall area, Florida, but certainly high recovery things. What it doesn't answer is how close can I get to the tree?
And it doesn't differentiate between impact and significant impact. I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. So
if you look at the work by that, I think it's my mycologist in the UK that looks at the interaction of trees and the mycorrhizal fungi. She's saying that the actual influence of the tree is massive. It goes right out there, way past anything we've thought of before. So if you do stuff out there, yeah, sure, you can damage some of that fungi, I guess. But what does it do to the tree? Well, if it's inconsequential, then we don't have to worry about it. And I think this particular instance might fall into that category. You'll have an impact at around 15 times, but does it matter? Probably not.
Well, I mean, I think a good example, and I think if you are struggling with understanding trees and development sites, you need to get yourself a bonsai, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, and you need to understand what bonsai is about, because it's amazing what you can do to a tree. And we do it here with figs, and we used to do it when I was teaching. Take a Ficus rubiginosa in a 20-litre pot, a 2-litre pot, is it? The 20-centimetre pot, 20-centimetre across pot. Knock off all the roots, knock back half the branches, whack it on the table with some heat underneath it and misting, and the damn thing grows like crazy. And I'm not suggesting that's what you want to do to trees. I'm saying you need to understand that the loss of roots isn't necessarily a problem. And in fact, what we know is when it comes to bonsaiing, that bonsai trees generally outperform non-bonsai trees of the same species. So stress is not a bad thing to do to a tree necessarily, any more than stress is a bad thing to do to people. You know, one of the things we know is that as adults, we need to do some load stressing of our bodies. You know, we need to stress our bones and our muscles, and we need to stress our hearts and our lungs. And they're things that actually extend our life, not necessarily shorten it. And I think sometimes we look at trees and say, well, you know, we're going to cut the roots, that's the end of the tree, rather than, we're going to cut the roots, but the tree is able to deal with that. If it didn't, the very first time a wombat chewed through a 2-centimetre root, that'd be the end of it.
I would like to add the comment. I read an arborist report today from somebody who appeared to be well qualified, and it was a lot of pages, so it looked like a really good report. But when you look at it closely, they were saying things like, if you undertake certain activities in a tree protection zone, such as washing out concrete, or you chop a tree root, or you do these things, then it may cause the tree to decline and die. And yes, it's true. It might cause the tree, might. It doesn't mean it's going to. It doesn't even mean that it's likely to. And I think that I see very often this confluence of, yes, this, is stressing the tree, and it's better not to stress the tree, but it doesn't automatically mean that if you do that, the thing's going to die.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it's going to decline. I mean, fortunately, we've got a whole pile of trees that love the goldfish syndrome, you change the environment around them and they just adjust to it. We also have trees that don't do that. But I mean, my classic for doing it is figs. If you want a tree that, I was out at a site today, and there's a little high anthracene and ficus in the garden, and I thought, oh, it's only a tiny thing. It must have set it up. I thought, I didn't think there's any wasp to pollinate Ficus elastica. And then I look a little bit further down, and I see 2 trees that have been just thrown out of the pot. They've tipped out of the pot, chucked on the garden, and left. And both are growing fine. You couldn't think about anything that's worse. But here they are. And, Brachychiton rupestris is another one. We had one in a container that we kept in a container for 12 years before we finally planted out in the ground. That was a wine barrel sized container. So, half the wine barrel, the small little ones you buy. For 12 years without irrigation. It survived. It's in the ground now, and it's growing along like crazy because it's got more space. So I think, now I wouldn't want to do that to a lot of trees, but there are a whole pile of trees that do that quite well. And amazingly, there are quite a number of eucalypts amongst them that, grow in really horrible conditions for quite a number of years before they get going. I'm not suggesting that's what we want to do, but, again, one of the without question, the biggest issue associated with cutting roots on a tree is what?
Water.
The loss of water absorption.
Water absorption. So if I make it easier for the rest of the root system to take up water, I can offset, and not only can I offset, and Peter, you've been out to a site where I've demonstrated, Vicky, if you want to go to Susan Street in Auburn, and go up to the car park there behind the council chambers, look down, that fig there, 2 times trunk diameter. That's a bit closer than you'd normally like, 1.5 stories below ground. And that was the only secret we used on that tree. Well, that and the fact that it's in shade. So, that's not a huge ask. And I can show you the same effects with Lephostomans, with eucalypts, with Syzygiums, Brachychitons. I don't know of too many trees that don't respond to good water management. So, it's not, watering's not a hard thing to do.
I don't have any other questions for us, Mark, unless somebody's got something from the floor.
Did you get the question that I sent in, Peter?
Yeah, I did. Now, why haven't I put that up? Let me just have a look.
Pretty sure I don't have it.
Okay, I think this is it. I have written an arboricultural impact assessment for a commercial proposal in the Liverpool area. The project has been approved. However, the conditions of consent simply state that the arborist report should be complied with. No specific notes detailing the required tree protection measures or appointing a project arborist. There will be a driveway installed over the tree protection zone of a large eucalypt, and specific pruning required for a number of brush box trees along the street frontage. I fear there will be no project arborist appointed. Any suggestions appreciated?
It's a difficult one, Vicky, and I've dealt with this and struggled with this. If councils spent less time fighting with the arborists at large and more time working with us, it would be nice. But it's not always their problem either. It's problems with higher up in their systems. You know, as soon as a condition of consent is not complied with in our state, there's the opportunity to bring in a penalty infringement notice. I think for a company, it's about $6,000, individuals about $3,000. It's a decent enough over-the-counter fine. Okay, you get to choose to pay it or contest it. If you contest it, you could lose and go worse. So for me, locally, the local pizzeria and restaurant, we only got one shop in Shanes Park. That's it. He decided he was going to open up his restaurant area there without council consent. Council gave him a PIN. I think back in those days, the fine was about $600. He said, I'm going to contest it in court. Went off to court, and the court said, yeah, we agree with the city. There's your fine now. It's $45,000. That'll teach you to not misbehave. So I think you could become extremely rich just going around to development sites and saying, not correctly protected, not correctly protected, not correctly protected. Why don't they do it? You know, there's this push from the elected representatives. You don't want to, you know, make building too difficult to do. You don't want to make it too expensive. So there are a lot of political components to it. I don't know. I've never been able to figure out to get the developer to say, yes, I'm going to follow those things. I don't know how to get the developer to put waterproofing on the roof of my son's apartment correctly. Put firewalls in that they're obligated to, under law, put in, and they didn't put in. There are developers and builders out there that are just crooks. There are developers and builders out there that are overwhelmed by the information they get, and the documentation could be, 500 or 600 pages long. But there are also developers and builders out there that are plain stupid. I don't want to be nasty. That are unaware. So the first thing I would do is, if you know a development's going ahead, and that's one you've talked about, is just knock on the door and say, hey, you're meant to have an arborist report. You're meant to have this. Can I help? But even when I get engaged and it's an irrevocable contract, and I go out and all of a sudden they've trenched a metre away from the tree, 2 metres deep. So why? Oh, well, we had to. It's the only way we could run the stormwater line. Well, why didn't you trench it? Oh, why didn't you tunnel it? That would have cost us too much money. Now we want to get rid of the tree. I had a colleague call me just the other day saying exactly that. That all of a sudden they've excavated a metre close to the tree, cut through a whole part of the roots because there was a retaining wall there. So now they've come into where the retaining wall was. And what do I do about it? There's not much we can do about it. We can tell the city, but are they going to do anything about it? Maybe, maybe not. There are some places, if you're in Sydney City, I think if you told the council that something was going wrong, they'd act straight away. I think they're really great. A Kringai, I think, is reasonably good. But, come out to my end of the world in Blacktown and, the tree could get knocked over, and I'd say half the time they're going to get away with it. Although we have started putting penalty infringement notices on illegal removals in Blacktown about 2 years ago. So they are done now, but up until then, none. And the question I would ask of the mayor is, are you on the take? Or are you just not aware of the fact that this is an offence? Which one is it? If you're aware it's offence and you're not on the take, why aren't you prosecuting, and why aren't you collecting, and why aren't you enforcing? And so I was asked a number of years ago in the Land Environment Court, same sort of question, that Mr. Hartley, these are all very good things you're suggesting, but can you be sure that the builder's going to do this stuff? And my answer was probably not the best. It was Mark being Mark. I said, well, my job is to write the specifications. The consent authority, which is you in this instance, is required to enforce it. So if they want to do contempt and you don't want to do anything about it, you know, lawlessness will reign. And I think that's the dilemma. Many years ago, Holroyd Council had a tree management officer that was really go-getter, and he started going around saying, oh, fences in the wrong spot, mulch in the wrong spot. Here are 2 pins, $300 and $300 for an individual. I'll see you in a week's time. In other words, I'm coming back in a week's time. If it's not dealt with, I'm going to give them to you again. On the other hand, I did a property at Beauty Point where the guy said, look, I need a tree protection fence in, I need the mulching done, I need to sign off on how the health of the trees are. I've been given these pins and I have to answer all these pins before the court because I've taken them all to the court. And he had a bundle that was probably 2 centimeters thick of infringements. The building was too high, it moved it to the wrong spot, it adjusted the driveway, done all these things wrong. I said, what gives? He said, you know, it's easier to ask for forgiveness and pay the fines than it is to deal with the changes. So I just do whatever the hell I like and deal with the consequences afterwards. He said, and almost never will a court ask me to demolish something that's well constructed. And so I think we've got to build it all in that thing is, you know, what's going to happen? How many times have you guys, and it'll be interesting to hear, how many times you've gone out, you've looked at what's happened on development site, you're shaking your head and you said it's going to die. And 5 or 10 years later, you go past and you think, I know one day that thing's going to die, but you know you're already lost. You already know that the builder now is absolutely convinced he knows more than the arborist. And we've educated him about that. We said, you've got to be this far away or the tree will die, not might stress or might setback. And then he goes back, you know, 5 or 10 years later and says, I'm doing this every time, I'm doing it the wrong way every time. And I know that the arborists, only reason I pay them so I can get the tick. Once I've got the tick, I'm just going to do what I know already works. And that's a difficult situation. We need to weigh that up. I think what we do is in some ways cause ourselves more harm when you get an arborist that says you can't cut roots 3 times trunk diameter away from the tree because that will kill the tree.
That's right. And I think we bring it on ourselves to an extent because of that. This idea that, yeah, we know these activities will stress the tree and it may lead to the tree declining, but it doesn't automatically mean that it will cause the tree to decline and die. It's just increases the likelihood of it, and that people get, I think too many people get just caught up with that, and that the wording in the standard doesn't help. Yeah, when we get those situations, I think we have to we have ourselves to blame to an extent.
Yeah, look, and I think we've how we approach it. I think there's a point, and I know there'll be people that disagree with me, but there's a point to which the ACT government, in looking at their prescribed trees and protection of it and putting a value on it, have done something good. I think the City of Melbourne, City of Sydney, again, with their valuation on trees, you know, if you start putting a value on a tree and say, look, go ahead, but if the tree dies, this is your exposure. If the tree falls over, this is your exposure. Then allows people to start making an informed decision. And I think, you know, if you start looking at the true value, and I did this recently, last year, developer called me up and said, we need to convince the courts that these 2 trees are not going to have any significance if we remove them. And I said, I'm fine with that. He said, we'll do a replacement program. I said, I'm fine with that. I'll do it up for you. So I said, it can't be 1 for 1. I don't think it can be. And we then went and looked at how quickly the trees had grown, looked at some images, found the original planting date. And we said, okay, they're putting on whatever increase in trunk diameter. And we said, look, if we just go to canopy replacement, you're probably going to spend $20,000 on replacing the canopy. But if you're going to, on the 2 trees, 10,000 each, you can't get enough trees on the property. You're going to have to talk to the city, and the city's then going to have to say, yes, we're prepared to plant, look after, and nurture. And they have some offset. They're going to want compensation. And then I said, so let's look at tree replacement and biomass replacement. So how much carbon? And I think for the 2 trees, we're at about 90 odd trees to replace, and then it started getting up to around the $100,000. And the client said, I think we need to redesign. That starts to become that process. So again, what are you trying to compensate for? If we say a tree's worth $200, it may only be worth $200, but it's probably worth a lot more than $200. And we don't value trees. And I'll give you another good example of it, and tell me if it's different in your area. But when a car runs down the road and smashes into a telegraph pole, the police will record the information, provided the information on Telstra, who will collect the money for replacing that pole. Is that about right? How many of your local police will call the local council and say, your street tree's been hit by this car? We're just letting you know so you can claim for the cost of removing the damaged tree and replacing it with the new tree against the insurance company. I wonder how many police would do that. Any in your area, Rob, do that?
I wouldn't think so. No.
Isn't that funny? That car is allowed to destroy public property, but it can't destroy the property of a private corporation, publicly owned corporation, but it's still a private corporation. It's not owned by the government anymore, it's owned by the people.
I think this whole issue of tree valuation is fraught with the fact that we don't trade trees in terms of, we don't buy and sell existing trees the way even a power pole, that Telstra knows how much it's going to cost to replace that, because they know how much it costs to buy it, and they know how much it costs them to install it. So they've got a valuation for it, but
let me ask you a question. If we said the largest available tree and we just took it at 1,000 litre trees impact, it's going to be $4,000 or $5,000. I can't fit that tree in there, but I've lost that tree, and I've got to pay for the cost of cutting that tree down and grinding the stump out. So if I wanted to give back to the community what's been lost there, they could pay for a $4,000 or $5,000 tree to be put in a park somewhere, and a smaller tree put in the thing at the council's expense. That would be the same if I crashed through that telegraph pole and that telegraph pole is about to be removed by underground services or NBN or whatever else. They don't turn around and say, oh, don't worry, that pole is going to be deleted in another month, we don't need it. No, they send you the bill for replacing the pole. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to, and again, I asked my local council this question, why is it that you're not talking to the local police and saying anytime a tree gets hit by a car, we get called so we can see whether we can fix it, see whether we can manage it, see whether we need to remove it, and see whether we can get compensation for what we need to be compensated for. And it happens because in society, for all of us, including us as arborists, it's just a tree. I hate to say it, that's just the horrible phrase. It's just a tree. And
they're still viewed as more of a nuisance than an asset by some people.
I think even by most arborists. I mean, when arborists do risk analysis, they look at the risk of a tree, they say, and I can think of one that's going on in the northern beaches at the moment. the value of the life-saving health benefits of the tree each year exceed the risk from the tree by an order of magnitude or more. But no, we're going to get rid of the tree because it may cause a problem. It may harm somebody.
I don't know if anybody else has run into this, but on a number of occasions, I've been called out to look at a tree by a client who said, I want you to have a look at this tree. I think it's dangerous. I'm not happy with the risk from this tree. And, oh yeah, and it's in my view.
Yeah. Look, I'm concerned about the risk from the tree, and I know Vicky has had this, and anyone else in Sydney has had this. The trees in the backyard, I'm concerned about it, and you get there and you think, that's a perfectly good tree, and you can ask this question, and inevitably they'll give you an answer. Are you looking at doing a complying development consent? And they'll say, yeah, how'd you know? You say, well, because it's a perfectly good tree, it might only be an 8-metre high tree. And the same with trees and risk assessments. I looked at one in a school this morning or yesterday morning. It was a Syzygium paniculatum that was about 8 metres high, 3 stems, 100 mils in diameter each. And the arborist that looked at it said, this tree is dangerous and needs to be removed as a matter of urgency. And I'm sitting there thinking, under what basis? Well, it's got tight unions. Again, without the benefit of recent research, you might say that, but how many times do you see a codominant stem and a lily-pilly fail? They do, but it's not regularly. It's like melaleucas. They do, but it's not regularly. And so, and then what's that going to do if it falls on someone? 100 mil diameter branch that fails at ground level. The only way you're going to hurt somebody is to cut it off, shape the end of it like a baseball bat, and then start beating into the kid. And that's probably not going to happen when the tree falls over. But that makes me want to do that to the arborist. It makes me want to get it, shape it, and go beat the arborist up because it's just garbage. It's interesting, the same arborist probably that said the 10-millimeter branches were going to kill somebody and they need to remove the tree as a matter of urgency. It's people believe it genuinely because they get scared, and what they're really scared of is what?
Maybe it's the risk to their professional reputation.
Yeah, how would I answer this? If a tree falls over and kills a kid in a school, what would I say? If a tree falls over and gives a kid a knock and he goes to hospital, what are they going to say? I mean, Channel 10 is going to be out the front of my place and saying, arborist Mark Hartley looked at this tree and now look at the situation, rather than saying, look, the traffic engineer looked at the lights. He said, no, you don't need lights for that intersection. And, a year later or 2 years later, someone dies at that intersection. The traffic engineer doesn't say, oh, woe me. He says, the data just didn't support it at that stage. And it may or may not do now. Why is it that we struggle with that? And the answer is because we don't deal with that data and number stuff all the time, whereas a traffic engineer does. But I can cut the road toll down in Australia half it at least. We just drop the road speed by 20 kilometres an hour. That'll start. And society would say, forget that. I'm not prepared to pay the increased cost of freight, transport, travelling. I'm prepared to accept some level of risk. And it's in that context that the government still continues to try and get the mortality rate from driving down. And it does nothing to worry about the mortality rate of things that are like, what are we doing about the mortality rate from horses? We've got to do something about that. I mean, horses kill more people than trees every year in Australia. I don't know what we're going to do.
On that topic of over-exaggerating risk and recommending work and stuff, what do you do if you go out to a school, for example, and the arborist said, oh, yeah, crown reduction, all trees too dangerous. I've had one of them recently, and I'm just looking at it. None of these are high risk or even remotely close.
Difficult.
Like I don't want to have to cut all these trees, for no reason.
It's about communication, and it's a hard one. because the arborist genuinely believes what he's saying, don't take me the wrong way. Not that he's not sincere, it's just that he's sincerely wrong. Now, the likelihood that you've got 20 trees in a school that are high risk is so small.
It was
No,
all the trees on the whole school, apart from one little apple tree.
yeah,
All nice big ukes.
and I
And
explained
we quoted the work, and it was going to be something like $30,000 to do it all. And the school was horrified. And one of the guys I was working for, he said, "Oh, well, we have to do it now. It's in the report." And I said, "Well, I'm not doing it."
As Mark says, it's a matter of communication, and my suggestion would be to go to the school and say, "Hey, you know, there's something wrong here. I'd get a second opinion." And
Yeah.
I think you provide these second opinions often on risk reports, Mark.
Yeah, and even then it's hard for people to change their mind. There's a general perception in society that trees are out to kill everybody. And if someone can find me, I know what the data says, because the government provides that. Bureau of Statistics has it. You can go have a look at it. Death from beds. But how many times have you heard on the media that somebody died falling out of their bed or falling onto their bed? How many times have you heard about somebody dying falling downstairs? I think the odds of that are about 1 in 360,000 from rough memory. Yet I know somebody who died falling downstairs. I know a person who fractured his spine only a year and a half ago, an arborist, falling down his own stairs. You know, we just don't deal well with these things, and we get in once the arborist says, "Oh, look, you know, this risk is horribly high. It's 1 in 200,000, 1 in 500,000. I read one today, 1 in 500,000. I'm thinking the benefit of that tree way outweighs the $10 of annual risk. And sometimes that risk is so absurd. I looked at some melaleucas today in a school where the concern was codominant stems might cause the tree to fail. The trees are about 1 metre away from 2 metre high brick retaining wall with soil behind them. So the trees are lower than the wall. And I'm thinking, no, if I were to take that tree, if I would take a 5 pound or 10 pound or 20 pound sledgehammer and start bashing in that wall, I'm going to have troubles breaking it. If the trees fall on the wall, they're not going to do anything to it. And yet, you know, this guy's got it in his head. This is what will happen. And it's a really hard thing to deal with, trying to change it. So when you've got a member of the public that believes it, all they've got then is what they call a confirmation bias. I knew the trees were dangerous. And it's very hard to deal with it the other way. Now, I will say, one of the things I've used just recently, and I don't know how well it will work, is to say, look, think about this. These trees in these schools have been inspected now for 11 or 12 years consecutively. How likely is it that there is one high-risk tree in the school, let alone 2 or 3?
Oh, yeah, but I don't want any risk to my students, Mark. I don't want anything to happen on my watch.
So here's what you need to do. You need to make sure that their parents don't drive them to school and they're not allowed to walk to school. You'll have to pick them all up by bus, because each year in Australia, more kids are killed walking to or from school or being driven to or from school than are killed each decade from trees falling on them. All everywhere, out in the public, at home, doesn't matter. It's just absurd thinking, I don't want any risk. I don't want to be horrible. I know I'll get into trouble for it, but you probably shouldn't have teachers, because a percentage of those teachers are going to be problematic. They're going to cause anguish for the student or abuse them or whatever. We shouldn't have teachers. No risk. I don't want stairs. You're going to have to take every set of stairs away. And I think I showed you last thing, the school with the every post had been padded, and then the brick corners of the building and the brick corners of the stairwell left open. Now, I would rather walk into a rounded curve on a metal post than into the square edge of a building. And I would never think about putting padding on the corner of a building. But, well, I would in a mental institution. Okay, so maybe that's the problem. Maybe schools think that they're mental institution, and that's probably because somebody that's running them is mental. And in New South Wales, our department is just crazy. I mean, some of the reports that I've read, the fact that somebody couldn't look at it straight away and say, "Hang on, they're having a go at us. They're having a play here. You know, this can't be right." You know, when you see 80 trees that need urgent work, or 16 trees that need an aerial inspection, or 20 trees that need a tomograph. Really, is there a school that's that bad?
Yeah, but Mark, if the report's 60 pages long, and it's written in incomprehensible jargon, and it's got references with it all through, well, it must be right.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I will say I keep on going back to, and I know it's we've got it on the system somewhere there, Peter, is the minimum the minimum performance criteria for a tree risk assessment. And the number of times I say to the department, this report should be, I'm rejecting this report, and I recommend the DOE do the same, because it doesn't meet the minimum standards. Now there's, I know that there's different risk assessments out there that individuals have developed, that look all nice and fancy and they look great, but they fail to meet the three requirements. For example, likelihood of the part failing, likelihood of the target being there, and the consequence. Those are the three bits. And I can think of at least two companies off the top of my mind that turn over millions of dollars in risk assessment that just decide to tear that up and say, nah, just make it simple matrix like the work health and safety matrix. Well, that's great. When I'm driving the car, I know the likelihood of me having a consequence. But I know the consequence when I'm not driving the car is zero, because nobody drives that. The difference is I'm a moving target under a tree. Therefore, I can't have just one likelihood. I've got to have two likelihoods. And, there's a classic thing, how the largest manager of trees in our state, which is the Department of Education, trees in public areas, how they don't understand that just shows how deficient the system is. And it's going to be, we're going to deal with this for the next decade or two. It is not going to disappear. I noticed, I read a judgment out of Victoria that's just come up recently from a caravan park. And again, some of the comments that were made in that, one of the arborists looks at the branch that's fallen off and killed the person and said, "Oh, I don't know why it failed." That's a problem. Why don't we know why parts fail? An airplane wing drops off, we know why it failed. We'll research, we'll find out. Well, they're wooden airplane wings. So what are we going to do about that, hey? How come we can figure out when a wooden wing fails, but we can't figure out when a wooden branch fails? That's because we don't know enough. Our industry is poorly educated. And so you end up then with the arborist saying, but if I had inspected the tree and done an aerial inspection and pruned it, that branch wouldn't have failed. Well, why would you have pruned that branch if you didn't know why it failed? You're saying you'd prune every branch? And like Niels has said, that's some people, and I have a standard saying when someone says that to me, and that is, well, what we could do is we could cut off every branch, we could cling wrap up everyone's head, including yours, and when you realize you're stupid, we'll stop doing dumb things. It's just an absurd suggestion. And yet there are people out there who absolutely convinced that's the right thing to do. And I got a text message the other day from a guy who said, so what would you say to a coroner if a branch falls off the tree and it kills somebody? Well, that was a freaky event. It's a perfectly good thing to say. If you don't know that a branch is going to fall off. I mean, yes, there are some of those really exciting ones. I saw one in the school today where you could see the fracture and the branch is kicked up and it's been supported on other vegetation. I know that's eventually going to hit the ground. But it's rare that you get to see something like that. It's not an everyday event. And, you know, a perfectly normal branch that you couldn't tell why it was going to fail, why would you reduce it? And we're talking in Yarra Valley end of the world. They're big trees there. You know, would you go out and do a reduction print on every tree that overhangs the road or every road that goes through there? Hell no.
Well, Nils is gonna.
Sorry?
Nils is gonna. Oh no, he's refusing to.
make a lot of money. You know, we just can't afford to do that sort of thing. And even if you put the value of the human life up to the $70 million mark, you can't justify what we're already doing. We're well and truly over scamming the deal just because trees are big and they look like they're dangerous. It's like there's a politician, you might have heard of him, called Katter. Comes from northern Queensland. He wants to get rid of the Queensland saltwater crocodile up his end of the world because they're dangerous. But when you consider the one person a year that's taken by a saltwater crocodile, how much money would you spend? Well, the most you would spend is 72 million. According to the Office of Cabinet and Prime Minister and Cabinet, you spend about 5.5 million. And you're not going to get rid of all the crocodiles for that at all. Not even going to make a start. And in fact, you're more likely to have one of the crocodile collectors get hurt and have damage. And that's what happens with trees. You know, you're more likely to get somebody hurt. And that hurt is not just the hurt that comes from killing them. It's all the other things. And Rob, I think you know what I'm saying when I say as you get older, your body hurts more. You know, some of the things I did when I was a young arborist are paying on my body now, and that has a cost. And we say, oh, it's okay. We'll just exchange. You don't matter. You're just an arborist. And then, of course, there are arborists out there, and I know that they're sincere, but there are arborists out there that say, yeah, if I prune that tree, it's not going to fail. In fact, I used to do that in writing. I used to say, and I've got a written guarantee, we do a fine prune of your tree, a proper prune, and any part fails, we'll come and collect the fallen portion absolutely free. That's how sure we are, regardless of whether it's in a storm or what. Do you know why?
Nobody ever called you up and got you to go around and collect their...
I think 2 or 3 people over a period of about 12 or 15 years, Peter did. The reality is, even if your tree's got the obvious issues out of it, the dead branches and anything that looks really dodgy, almost nothing fails in storms. That's the reality. And the stuff that does fail, stuff that you just look at, you shrug and say, I could never have picked that. And so you pick it up, throw it through the chipper, pay for the half an hour for the guys to detour and be happy with it because they're happy. You know, so of course the guy who's pruned the tree says, look, I've made a big difference because there are very few branches that have fallen. And we actually have a tree risk expert in Victoria who said exactly that. You know, proactive tree management is really good because you reduce the amount of storm cleanup. No, storms are very localized. So the reason why this storm wasn't as bad as the last one is the microburst wasn't in your suburb. It was in a different suburb. And, you know, you've got to understand that before you can even start looking at those things. Guys, we're at past 8 o'clock, longer than we should do. Get your questions to Peter. Peter, get the questions across to me a little earlier.